Crunching numbers. Looking at the financial viability of Benalto School. There are a few things to consider. Number one, let's all agree that the $160,000 that Chinook's Edge subsidized this year to make our school function isn't feasible for any other year. And getting to this point of the closure process, where that extra funding comes into effect under the closure umbrella, should never happen with a detailed and comprehensive plan in place, like the one we have recently built. With some basic math using Chinook's Edge numbers, and next year's enrollment based on 35 students, which is only 6 students more than our current enrollment for next year, and substantiated by our promotional strategies. We have projected funding for students slated at $239,000 plus $12,000 in additional income. With projected budgeted expenditures coming in at $302,000, we would be looking at a subsidy of $49,000, only for the 2016-17 school year. That's a 70% reduction. And as we mentioned in our project plan, we would be interested at looking more into fundraising dollars that we can use towards our school's allocated funds. Fast forward one more year, and we have projected 50 students for Benalto. If we can gain 10 students in 4 months, we truly believe we can gain an additional 12 within 18 months and our project plan in place. This brings us to projected funding for students slated at $361,000 plus $20,000 in additional income. With projected budgeted expenditures coming in at $392,000, we would be looking at a subsidy of $11,000. We're only guessing, but this very likely comes into a very agreeable average with all other schools in the division. There is also another number worth considering. Chinook's Edge subsidized $160,000 this year. If you close Benalto School, you could consider that money being put back in your budget for next year. As is, with the 10,800 students that exist currently, that would be like putting $14 into each of their per-student funds. But consider this. Most students at Benalto would plan on leaving Chinook's Edge School Division, equating to a loss of $140,000. So, of the $20,000 that would be left, that would be like putting $1.85 into each of your Chinook's Edge students' funds. Does closing Benalto School really make sense from a financial point of view? How is Benalto School financially viable? The student population at Benalto School held stable at a 50-student average for many years, decades even, despite our smaller than average catchment area. This 3-year decline should not be enough to push a permanent decision that will change the entire future of our community. We have provided details in our project plan showing how 50 students and the teacher resources to make an educationally viable school result in numbers that are on par with Chinook's Edge cost per student average. There is great research to back this up. Michael Corbett states, on the question of whether closing small schools actually saves money at any level, there is once again a dearth of good evidence. Small local schools typically represent established community infrastructure that gets replaced by new construction and by increased busing. There has been no good evidence that waves of consolidation over the past 5 decades in Atlantic Canada have led to any cost saving for school boards or for the province. Noting this, having crunched the numbers for how much closing Benalto School would save you, is it worth it? When we are providing another option and a detailed plan to accompany it. Consider this. There are policy options other than school closure. In England, for example, the movement against school closure was so powerful in the 1990s that a policy was instituted nationally to essentially keep schools open unless community members wanted them closed. This policy, known as presumption against school closure, has resulted in a radical halt to waves of school closure across the nation. Let's look deeper at those policy options. Chinook's Edge prides itself on being one of the largest rural school divisions in Alberta. The broad area of central Alberta that it covers is larger than most people realize, and in that area you have some urban centers that are growing in population and have schools reaching enrollments of 400 to 500 kids. Those schools are a much different culture and environment than the rural schools of Benalto, Elnora, Poplar Ridge, Reed Ranch, Spruce View, and Chinook Center. More students mean more funding, and higher student-teacher ratios mean less costs. So financially speaking, these larger schools may be seen as choice schools for a school division. The Vermont Small Schools Group published this in their Small Schools Report. Small schools may cost more to operate than larger schools, but they are worth the investment because of the value they add to student learning and community cohesion. But differences in population numbers shouldn't be the primary deciding factor in a funding model. Picture the beautiful nation we live in, and imagine a funding model where we looked at Prince Edward Island and said, "I'm really sorry, you don't have the numbers. Everybody has to move out. We'll bus you over to Quebec because we're shutting you down." It sounds absurd, doesn't it? That's why we've presented you with a project plan that we hope you will stand behind and promote as a means to save all of our rural schools. We've built the connections. We've started the groundwork. We're ready to join forces with every single rural school across Alberta and make this change. Do we really want to support a policy that only promotes more urbanization? What do you have to lose? If we are granted the ability to complete this 2-year project plan, and at the end of it our numbers are still below 25, you have every reason to hold another vote and unanimously declare that Benalto School is not a viable option for the school board. As a community and as a group of parents, we cannot argue that point. But what about giving this a chance? A 2-year extension that follows a detailed plan of action, unlike the 2-year viability process that currently exists. And within that 2-year extension, a comprehensive and large-scale lobbying push to change the funding structure that exists and help save the future of all rural schools. You realize that if Benalto School closes, we won't be the last. There will always be a school struggling when compared to the larger urban centers that continue to grow. Let's take a stand together and fight for all of our rural schools, and most importantly, our students that grow into amazing people as a result of these schools. You could ask yourselves, will Chinook's Edge lose more by closing the school than they will from granting a 2-year extension?